The story of the light in the highest window. Rich, Scott, and Bill had spent half their lives talking about the old mansion on the edge of town. It sat behind a leaning iron fence, its paint peeling in long gray strips, windows like empty eye sockets, and a roof that sagged under decades of neglect. Every kid in town knew the stories. Lights that flickered when no one lived there, cold spots that moved on their own, and the soft, rhythmic sound that sometimes drifted down from the highest window on windy nights. The boys always scoffed. Myths, old house noises, dare talk, and nothing more. Until the night the light appeared. It was late, the kind of night when the sky felt low and heavy. Rain had started as a fine mist and turned into a steady curtain. Thunder rolled somewhere far off. The three of them were cutting through the overgrown path that ran past the property when Scott stopped short and pointed. In the highest window, a pale yellow glow pulsed once, then held steady. No one said anything for a long moment. Then Rich, who had never met a dare he wouldn't take, grinned in the dark. Well, looks like somebody's home after all. Scott swallowed. Bill's hands were already shoved deep in his jacket pockets. They both tried to look unimpressed. They failed. The rusty front gate complained loudly when Rich shoved it open. Wet weeds slapped their legs as they crossed the yard. The front door was locked solid. Rich found a side window whose latch had long since given up. He climbed through, dropped onto dusty floorboards, and a moment later, the heavy door swung inward with a long, tired sigh. 3 flashlight beams cut thin cones through the gloom. The air inside smelled of old wood, damp plaster, and something faintly sweet, like forgotten perfume. They had barely stepped into the front hall when the sound reached them. Rrrap, rrrap, rrrap. It came from somewhere above, steady and deliberate. Scott's voice cracked the silence. "Is anybody there?" Nothing answered. He tried again, louder. Still nothing. The staircase rose into darkness. Each step announced itself with a deep, protesting creak. It went slowly, flashlights sweeping the walls. Portraits hung at odd angles. The painted eyes seemed to follow the moving beams. On the second floor, the sound grew clearer. Rrrap, rrrap, rrrap. Bill whispered, "What the heck could that possibly be?" Rich answered without looking back. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." They began checking rooms. The first door opened onto what must once have been a library. Books still lined the shelves, but many had swollen with moisture and frozen in strange, warped shapes. On a reading table lay an open volume, whose pages had been carefully cut into silhouettes. Tiny paper figures of children holding hands, dancing in a circle. Under the beam of Scott's light, the figures seemed to shift slightly, as if the paper itself were breathing. In the corner stood a tall clock with no hands. Its pendulum swung in perfect time with the distant sound upstairs, even though the clock's face was blank. The next room was smaller. A child's nursery, long abandoned. A rocking horse sat in the center, its painted eyes staring upward. When Rich's flashlight passed over it, the horse rocked once, twice, then stopped. On the dresser sat a music box with a cracked lid. Bill, against his better judgment, lifted the lid. A few notes of a lullaby played, then the mechanism seized, and the tune reversed itself, playing backward in a thin, metallic voice. The boys left quickly. Across the hall was a study. Maps covered one wall, maps of the town, of the surrounding woods, and of places that did not exist. Someone had drawn thin, red lines connecting the mansion to every other building in town, like a spider's web. On the desk lay a set of old keys, each labeled in faded ink with a single word: truth, memory, door, silence. None of the keys matched any lock the boys could see. A large mirror hung opposite the desk. When they looked into it, their reflections appeared a half-second late, as though the glass were remembering them rather than showing them. The sound continued, patient and unhurried. Rrrap, rrrap, rrrap. They climbed the second staircase. The steps here were narrower and steeper. The air grew colder. The first room on the third floor contained nothing but chairs. Dozens of them, arranged in neat rows facing a blank wall, as if waiting for a performance that never began. Dust lay thick on the seats. When Scott brushed one, the dust rose in a perfect human silhouette that hung in the air for several heartbeats before collapsing. The next room was lined with shelves of glass jars. Most were empty. A few held small objects suspended in cloudy liquid, a pocket watch still ticking, a single black feather, a child's shoe, a silver locket that slowly opened and closed by itself. One jar near the back contained only darkness, an absolute black that seemed to drink the light from their flashlights. None of them reached for it. At the end of the corridor stood a door unlike the others. It was perfectly circular, set into the wall like a porthole. The wood was dark and polished, almost warm to the touch. Rich pushed it open. Beyond lay a short passage that ended in a second door, this one triangular, its three sides meeting in sharp points. The boys exchanged looks but said nothing. Scott opened it. They stepped into a room crowded with small wooden footstools of every height and shape, scattered across the floor as though a dozen invisible people had just stood up and left. The strange sound was louder here, almost insistent. Rrrap. Rrrap, rrrap. Beyond the stools, half hidden by shadow, was a third door, an octagon no taller than 3 feet. Its edges were precise, almost mechanical. Scott dropped to his knees and pushed it open. The boys had to crawl. The final room was small and nearly empty. In the far wall stood a tall cabinet of dark wood, its doors closed. The sound came from inside it, clear and steady now, filling the space. Rrrap, rrrap, rrrap. Rich stepped forward and pulled the cabinet doors open. There, resting on the single shelf, was a large roll of heavy wrapping paper, partially unrolled. A gentle draft from some unseen crack in the wall was causing the free edge of the paper to lift and fall against the wooden shelf. Rrrap, rrrap, rrrap. The 3 boys stared. Outside, the storm had quieted. Rain still whispered against the roof, but the house itself felt suddenly ordinary, dusty, old, and empty. Rich closed cabinet doors. Scott let out a long breath that was almost a laugh. Bill shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They made their way back through the strange doors and the silent rooms, down the creaking stairs, and out into the wet night. The highest window was dark again. None of them spoke until they were well past the iron gate. Then Rich said, almost thoughtfully, "Still the best dare we ever took." Scott and Bill didn't argue, and for years afterward, whenever the wind was right and the old mansion creaked in just the right way, one of them would glance toward the highest window and smile, because they knew exactly what was making that sound, and the knowing somehow made the dark a little less empty.